Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them, with artists, scientists, educators, social scientists, government leaders, politicians. All will be one to one. I'm delighted to welcome the former Governor of Vermont and the former U.S. Ambassador to Switzerland, Madeleine Kunin, to the program today. Her latest book, Pearls, Politics, and Power, How Women Can Win and Lead, has just been published by Chelsea Green Publishing. Given the presidential campaign, it couldn't be more timely.
Yes.
So why'd you write this book?
Well, the simple answer is to pass the torch to the next generation of women in particular, because when I was elected governor in 1984, I thought the floodgates had opened and there'd be this armada of women cruising
marching
behind me.
Right.
But it hasn't happened. You know, I look behind me, and there are a few, sure, and notables like Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. But after all these years of women being educated, the women's movement, women still only comprise 16% of the United States Congress.
That seems to be the number. We're stuck at 16%, and I think it's also 16% of heads of companies or something like that.
Right. Well, I was surprised. I came across that number 3 times, actually, which I'm sure is coincidental, but also tells you something. 16% is also the figure of women around the world in the lower houses of Parliament. And you'd say, okay, 16% of the Congress, 16% around the world, maybe we're right where we should be. But when you look at a United Nations study of 142 countries, you have to scroll way down to find the United States of America. We're 71st. And the third time it came up, as you indicated, women in corporate America. According to Catalyst, those CEO positions, board of directors, vice presidents, women only comprise 16% of those.
That's in the United States.
That's in the United States.
So why is the United States so far behind, particularly far behind other countries in terms of women in political office and positions of power? You know, even Rwanda, you know, if you look at the parliament has almost half are women. So why is the United States lag so far behind?
Well, I think one thing is that women in other countries have really demanded that they be there. And they've demanded and written into their constitutions quotas. Rwanda, after the genocide, which was horrific, those women got to work in their communities. They basically rebuilt the society from the ground up. And when the Constitution was written, they demanded a quota. And, you know, when I spoke to a senator from Rwanda, she said something very powerful to me. She said, we knew we had to do this for the survival of our children. And I think in the United States, women often think of themselves removed from politics, and they don't want to get into that nitty-gritty, often dirty, often, you know...
Don't want to sully their hands with it.
Exactly. And they think, rightly so in some instances, that they can get a lot done outside of the political system. And we do need activists. We do need people who volunteer and work in the community. But when the chips are down, the decisions, you know, whether you have paid family leave, whether you go to war, whether you get out of Iraq, those decisions are still going to be made by the people who have the power of the vote in the halls of power. Right.
You were born in Switzerland, and you served as the U.S. ambassador there. Compare the level of women in politics in the two countries.
Well, it's kind of ironic that the Swiss women only got the vote in 1971.
Wow.
Yes. But today they have more women in their parliament than we do. And they've had 2 female presidents, but I have to add, the presidency is not very powerful in Switzerland. It's a rotating position. But still, they're engaged in a way that women aren't here. And to add to the irony, Iraq and Afghanistan demanded a quota when their constitutions were written with the help of the United States. And Iraq met it of 25%. Afghanistan exceeded it of 27%. So back to your question, I think people think politics is dirty, and they're not entirely wrong, of course, but they also question whether you can get anything done. You know, if I submit myself to this scrutiny in the public eye, is it worth it?
Yeah.
And that's why I talked to almost 100 women in this book to prove through their own stories, through their own experiences, that yes, you can get something done. And yes, women being there do make a difference.
So Swiss women didn't get the vote until 1970. What did they just didn't want it, or what was
No,
it?
they
What
wanted
happened?
it, but it's a pretty patriarchal country. And, you know, it was like reliving the suffragist movement of the early 1900s. They said, well, the men can take care of it. And, you know, they'll just vote like the men. And it just took a very, very long time.
Wow, that's amazing. Who do you think fears, and you acknowledge in the book that some people still, in this day and time, in this country, still fear women in power. Who do you think fears women in power more? Is it men, or is it women? Is it older people, younger people?
Well, it's probably a little bit of everything. I don't think we fear women in power at certain levels. For example, state legislatures. The state of Vermont has the highest percentage of women in our state legislature.
Okay.
So does New Hampshire. So nobody asks the question, can a woman run for the state legislature? I doubt that they ask that question in New York State today. So, and the Congress, for the most part, maybe some districts where there's never been a woman, it might still be a question, but people are used to seeing women there. And my own simple political science theory is the more you see, the more you get. You know, the more women are at the helm in any area, whether it's Drew Gilpin-Faust, the new president of Harvard, or whether it's Nancy Pelosi, or whether it's the new CEO of the Pepsi-Cola company, it's a given that that's where women now belong. But when you go to the top, when you go to most CEOs, when you go to the first serious female candidate for president of the United States, it gets a little more complicated.
Yeah.
Because she is breaking new ground. And in the United States, we've never, of course, had a female president.
Right.
Other countries have.
Right.
So they've surmounted that, but we haven't yet.
Your book includes some mini biographies of women whose lives have served as an inspiration to you. Tell me about some of them.
Well, you know, I've been teaching a class at the University of Vermont on women in politics and leadership, and I found out a couple of things. One is that the young women don't know the history of the women's movement. I mean, they don't know that Abigail Adams was a fighter for women's equality.
They should watch the series on HBO now.
Where she's having her day in the sun.
Right.
But, and they may have heard of Bella Abzug, they may have heard of Betty Friedan, but just in passing. So interspersed here are some of their writings. And the second thing I learned from my students is that they do have a social conscience. They do want to do good works. And as you know, as a teacher, students are very engaged in volunteering and community service, but politics still seems a mysterious process. There still is an imaginary smoke-filled rooms where the guys make the decisions, even though the no smoking sign has been tacked on the wall now. So they think of it as an exclusive club that you can't enter. So part of the purpose of this book is to demystify politics, to tell you, yeah, you can get into that room, and in most instances, they'll probably be glad to see you. Not in all. You know, sometimes it's still an old boy network, but the old boys are becoming an endangered species.
It's all that smoking. It's all that secondhand smoke that's, it killed them off. You talk about the great symbolic value of Nancy Pelosi's election to the Speaker of the House, and that's what the title of your book is based on, Pearls, Politics, and Power. Tell me about that. Why is that so important?
Well, I remember, the first time I watched the State of the Union speech when she was the Speaker. And you know how you stare at the president, but then your mind wanders during the State of the Union speech sometimes, and you look at, you look at the people behind the president, the speaker, and the vice president. So for the first time, there was a woman there. And I just think that was a powerful message to girls, to women, that this place welcomes you. It is not a men's club any longer. So even though we only have 16% women, to have a woman at the helm, wielding the gavel, running the show, third in line for the presidency, that's a powerful message. And all of us need not only role models, but we need people to see people doing what we can imagine ourselves doing. We can't imagine it without seeing them.
Right. Tell me about your political trajectory and how a nice girl like you got into this business.
Well, that tells you something right there. Do nice people get into politics? I'd like to think yes. But, of course, they're not all nice, but they're all, I think, elected by the people and deserve some respect. But I got in for a couple of reasons. In the early 70s, there were two revolutions, basically, the women's movement and the environmental movement. And both of them really spoke to me. The women's movement in two ways. One, the battle cry then was the Equal Rights Amendment, which Vermont was about to consider. So I wanted to be part of the voter message, to have the power of the vote. But the women's movement also affected me personally, in the sense that it changed my sense of timing, what I would do with my life. I had 4 children. You know, the message then was, you got to wait till your kids grow up, we're all in college, before you can get back in the workforce. And the women's movement gave me permission, in fact, encouraged me, get out there, run for office. And it also gave me a group of like-minded women who cheered me on, and that's very important as well.
We're going to take a short break. We'll be back with more with Madeleine Kunin, author of Pearls, Politics, and Power, How Women Can Win and Lead.
Sure, my neighbors Jean and Louise, they may be superheroes with superpowers, but that doesn't make them so super at saving energy and money.
Honey?
I may not be able to harness the power of the elements, but I save significant cash and help the environment with appliances, electronics, and windows featuring the Energy Star label. Discover your own energy-saving superpowers with Energy Star. Go to getenergysmart.org.
Mom, Dad's making fondue again.
Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy, and I'm talking with former Vermont Governor Madeleine Kunin, author of Pearls, Politics, and Power, How Women Can Win and Lead. So now for the big question, who are you backing in this presidential election?
Well, I'm backing Hillary Clinton, and for a number of reasons. I have known her through the years because Bill Clinton and I overlapped as governors, so I got to know her as a gubernatorial spouse. And she always paid attention at the meetings, and then I got to know her when I served in the Clinton administration as Deputy Secretary of Education and then Ambassador to Switzerland. She came to Switzerland while I was there. We invited her. And I guess, one, I'm always impressed by her brilliance. And I think it doesn't hurt to have brains when you want to be president.
And we know the consequences of having a president with no brains, don't we?
Well, you said it. But I think we've learned that lesson very well. And I guess I know her as a multidimensional person. In campaigns, we tend to describe people as cardboard cutout figures. And I see her also as caring and warm and competent. So I'm not supporting her just because she's a woman, because we know we've had people running for president and other offices. I would never advocate to vote on the basis of gender alone. But I am excited that for the first time in our history, we have the first qualified woman running for president. A lot of people in my position, and I suspect perhaps in your position as well, wish that history had timed itself a little better,
right,
so that we didn't have to choose between the first African-American male and the first white woman. But I you know, the good news is, and sometimes in this campaign we forget to celebrate it, that for the first time in our history we have an African-American man and a white woman as the leading contenders for the Democratic nomination. And if anybody believes this country doesn't change, I mean, this was not predicted even a year ago.
Right.
So
right.
I think we've come a long way.
So that's a good thing, even though it's tough. Makes it tough.
It's tough.
Right.
It's tough for a lot of people to make choices.
Right.
But it's good for the country.
Hillary Clinton's vote for the Iraq War, as you point out in the book, her vote for the Iraq War seems to be the thing that is hurting her most with Democratic voters. Do you agree with some of the people quoted in your book that it would be political suicide for her to admit that that was a mistake?
I don't know if it would be suicide, but I think it would be harder for her. Now, I have to say, I disagree with her on that vote. And I remember, you know, feeling very disappointed the day after. But I've moved beyond that because I think at this point, both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton would have the same strategy to get us out of Iraq. And that's what counts. But can a woman apologize? It's just a bit harder because the gender stereotypes kick in.
Flip-flopper, can't make up your mind.
Exactly, exactly. And, you know, John Edwards could, nobody accused him of that. But I think it would be harder for Hillary. And then I think something else is at work, too. I think she actually did believe it was the right thing at the time.
You don't think it was just because she wanted to show that she would be strong? You're contemplating a presidential run, and I've got to show that I can hang with the boys?
It probably played a part, but I don't think it was the only thing. Recently we read her speech, and part of it was being the senator from New York, where 9/11 occurred.
Right.
And I think, you know, the threat of terrorism was more real for a New York senator than it may have been for a Vermont senator. And also having...
They weren't targeting Vermont? Oh, my goodness.
I know. Fortunately not. Fortunately not New York anymore either, we hope. But and I think having experienced being so close to the presidency, she probably gave George Bush the benefit of a doubt, which we now realize was
You
a
can't
big
give
mistake.
George Bush the benefit of the doubt. The press coverage of Hillary Clinton, there's a lot of talk about as being biased, unfair, double standard for a woman. Is it just, or is it just par for the course?
Well, it's a new course.
Yeah.
Because women have run for office before, of course, and for governors, probably governors is the closest analogy. And we know that there's always much more attention on your hairstyle,
your cleavage.
Your cleavage in Hillary's case, and those things seem to have gone away. But there is still, I mean, what shocks me, I guess, is some of the really nasty misogynist statements in press. And a lot of it...
Rush Limbaugh, you know.
Yeah, Rush Limbaugh. I mean, every day. And that this is considered socially acceptable.
Yeah.
I think that's the unfortunate part. But, you know, some other good things are happening. For example, after the so-called weepy moment before the New Hampshire primary, a lot of people really beat up on Hillary. Some said, oh, Cho, she's too emotional. She doesn't have the strength to be commander-in-chief. Others said, at last the Ice Maiden has melted. And then there were a group of bloggers who said, she's faking the whole thing.
Yeah.
But then something else happened. A lot of women got upset and came to her defense. So I think women today are much more alert to sexism and much more willing to speak up against it. Not all women, of course, but I think a substantial number have their antennae out there.
Yeah.
And when they see that bias, I mean, they made Chris Matthews apologize for
What
a
did he
remark.
say? What did he say?
You know, I think he said something about that, maybe it was someone in his staff, that Chelsea was pimping for...
Oh, yeah.
That was pretty brutal.
Yeah, really, really bad remark. Whether or not Hillary wins the Democratic nomination, whether or not she makes it to the White House, how do you think she's going to be remembered?
I think she'll be remembered as the first woman who got this number, whatever number it ends up being, electoral votes. And that should be remembered as a pioneer. 21 women have run for president.
Is that true?
Yes, I know. You don't know their names. You know Shirley Chisholm and you know Carol Moseley Braun.
Right.
But you don't know the forerunners because they didn't really, they made history by being there, but they didn't make history we remember.
Right.
Because they hadn't a serious chance to begin with. So I think she will be remembered that way regardless, and a fighter. And, one of the things that is at work in evaluating her is something called the double bind. Double bind has been discussed in many contexts, but when women rise for a position at the top, either as CEO or president, they have to get a perfect balance between being tough enough to hold the job like commander-in-chief, and on the other side of the equation, feminine enough to be liked. Now, Hillary has won for the time being the commander-in-chief battle, but she's paid a price in being perceived as not soft and feminine and likable.
Right. And that's true of women in a lot of, women athletes.
Yes.
This double bind, and it makes it life a lot more difficult.
Yeah, it doesn't make it impossible.
Right.
But it's a higher bar.
Fine line to walk. You were a Vermont state legislator, lieutenant governor, deputy secretary of education, U.S. ambassador to Switzerland. What public position was your favorite?
Governor.
Was it? Okay.
I think it's still the best job in politics.
Yeah.
Because, you can really have an impact on the agenda. And you're still close to the people. At least in Vermont you are. And I think in most states, the governor has more contact with the public. You don't get that beltway syndrome that you get in Washington, where you think you rule the world, but you don't. And I think it's a tremendously exciting and satisfying position.
You write in your book that in politics there is never enough information and it doesn't arrive in time. And yet you've still got to go ahead and make a decision.
You do have to make a decision. And, one of the differences between women and men when they consider entering politics is women always think they have to be totally prepared, that they do have to know everything. A man will say, well, I can learn on the job, or I can apply what I already do to politics.
Right.
And I think what prevents women is they're too hard on themselves. As somebody said who I interviewed, any woman who's organized a birthday party for a 5-year-old can run a campaign. And that, I think, is true. So the purpose of this book is to encourage women to consider politics, not for their whole lives, for a part of their lives, because that is really where the critical decisions are made, and that they're much more capable than they think they are. And
you have 2 minutes in which to tell us what steps we could take as a nation to make sure that more women do that.
Well, that's 2 minutes. I'll try to wrap it up. But I think women really, in a way, have to be more demanding. A lot of people assume the women's movement is over, we've accomplished everything, what's the fuss about? But we haven't accomplished everything, because the voice of a woman in a political debate makes a huge difference. For example, paid family leave. We're the only industrialized country that doesn't have it. If we had more women in the Congress, you can be darn sure we would have that. So encourage other women to run. Help other women to run if you don't want to run yourself. And that encouragement, that asking another woman, is so important, because she may not have thought of herself as qualified until you tell her, yes, and I'll vote for you and I'll help you win.
And you also encourage us to encourage people who are running for office to say, I'm going to have a quota. I'm going to, make sure that 50% or 33% of the people in my appointees are women, right?
Right. The trend is for women governors, women presidents around the world, in Liberia, Chile, is to appoint more women, and I appointed more women. So women have a different network, so they're likely to appoint more women. And, you know, it makes a difference not because all women are virtuous or all women are liberal. I mean, obviously they're conservatives, they're all over the lot, which they should be, but they tend to vote in favor of issues like education, like childcare, like the environment, and their votes will make a difference in the outcome.
Okay, we're out of time, but I want to thank Madeleine Kunin for joining us. Pearls, Politics, and Power, How Women Can Win and Lead has just been published by Chelsea Green Publishing. For the City University of New York and 1 to 1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.